Hi, I'm Nora the Neuron, and today I'm going to be teaching you about diffusion. But first, what are neurons? And why are they important? Neurons are our brain cells. They communicate with each other in a process called neural networking. They are important because they can control every single thing that we do. But what controls the neurons? Meet sodium and potassium, the two ions that help control neuron function. Sodium and potassium ions are found in and around an area of the neuron called the axon. In the axon, they are able to control what neurons do. Let's zoom in on the axon. Here you can see that there are way more sodium ions outside of the cell and way more potassium ions inside the cell. This is where the concept of diffusion comes in. So, what is diffusion? Diffusion can be thought of as social distancing for ions of the same type. For example, if you're in a crowded space, social distancing dictates that you should move to a less crowded space. The same is true for ions. If you're a sodium ion and you're all by yourself, you're going to be pretty happy. But if a bunch of other sodium ions come in and start crowding your space, it's going to get a little uncomfortable. You, as the uncomfortable sodium ion, want to get out of this situation. So what do? You move to a place where there are less sodium ions. This brings us back to the axon, where we again can see that there are way more sodium ions outside the cell than inside the cell. Luckily, the membrane of the axon has a special tool called a gate that can open only for sodium ions and allow them inside the cell so that they can flow down their concentration gradient, or, in simpler terms, so that they can get away from each other. However, sodium is not the only player in the game. As you can see, there are also potassium ions here. Potassium ions are similar to sodium in that they do not like to be crowded together. However, unlike sodium, potassium has a higher concentration inside the cell. Luckily, the membrane also has gates that only allow potassium through. When these gates open, potassium ions are able to flow out of the cell and into a less crowded area. Now let's put it all together. Within neurons, sodium and potassium do not work independently. They are actually moving at the same time, just in opposite directions. So, as potassium is moving outside of the cell, sodium is simultaneously going through its channels to go into the cell. Let's take a look here at the whole picture. Now that we've learned what diffusion is and how it works, you might be wondering, why does it matter? What does it have to do with neurons and the brain? While the microscopic movements of tiny ions may seem unimportant at first glance, diffusion is actually the basis for all of life. That's right. Diffusion keeps neurons alive, and neurons in turn keep your brain working, so that you can do everything that your body is capable of, from eating cereal to doing math homework. It's all thanks to diffusion. Diffusion is just one example of how the little, seemingly insignificant things that go on in your brain have huge effects. How cool is it that we now live in a world where we can figure out the tiny stuff that makes us, well, us. Along with the help of my two trusty colleagues, sodium and potassium, I hope that you now understand what diffusion is and why it matters. But most importantly, I hope I've convinced you of how awesome neuroscience can be. That's all for now. Stay curious.